So you know that feeling of soul-crushing despair that cripples your spirit and starts you reaching for the razor blades? Yeah, I have that every morning. I hate mornings. I mean, I've never exactly been fond of them, having to wake up early and groggily prepare yourself for a day of enduring a job you detest, surrounded by people you can't stand. But that was a vacation in the Poconos, compared to what I've been waking up to recently. The thing is, if you don't find a safe enough spot to camp, you wake up surrounded by these cold, glassy, sunken eyes. They'll wake you up faster than a Red Bull latte laced with cocaine. If you're lucky, there will only be about 4 sets of them. If you're very lucky, there will be less than 3. Anything more than 5, best reach for those razor blades again. This morning, I woke up in an abandoned sky blue hatchback that appeared to have lost a game of chicken against a billboard for a sex shop located just off the next exit ramp. Maybe the driver got distracted by the voluptuous blonde model. Got me thinking how, in a post-apocalyptic world, these foxy starlets you see 10 feet tall on highway advertisements seem to live on with greater appreciation than anyone who ever authored a best-selling novel or a scientific journal. Anyway, I'm getting off track. When the dawn irritably coaxed me awake like a hungover, overweight ex-wife, and I opened the back of the hatchback, there was one standing there a few feet away, still as a stone, silent as a shadow, just staring at me. Only one of them this morning, which made me very lucky. In fact, it was my equivalent of waking up to find a $50 bill on the pillow. This one was kind of short and squat with a beer gut and quite a bit of shoulder hair. No wonder he hadn't been able to outrun them. It looked like the only reason he ever got off the couch in life was to collect his welfare check. I picked up my trusty hockey stick blade and charged him, and with a single swipe, I severed enough of his neck so that his head lobbed over sideways and bounced off his own shoulder, coming to a rest upside down against his back, dangling by a raw flap of bloody flesh. He hit the ground like a bag of silicone implants, and I went through his sweatpants pockets as the body shook for a moment while it bled out. Ironically enough, there was a lottery ticket in his waistband. I remember a time when they may have been worth something. Okay, let me start from the beginning. I'm Otis Black, which is absolutely not my real name. I figured since everyone who knew me is dead, I can afford to rename myself. I don't know exactly when and where it started. Some say a secret lab in Nigeria, others say Area 51, even a few who say some guy's basement in Tokyo. My money is on aliens, personally. Whatever the outbreak was didn't reach Canada until December 2017. The Canadian National Guard had done a pretty decent job securing the borders against the stumbling, unblinking hordes, but then something unexpected happened. The hordes stopped stumbling and started running, then climbing, and finally overpowering. I don't know if they were ever given an official designated name before they broke through the barriers, but I've taken to calling them jackals, because they're decent hunters, are outrageously ugly, and because I had an ex named Jackie who cheated on me while I was at my mother's funeral. Seriously, fuck you, Jackie. Now, the thing you have to know about jackals is they're primarily pack hunters. They run like they're being chased by missiles, and they never blink. They never blink. They can't afford to. That's how they expand their numbers. They look right into your soul and burn away everything that you had saved in your organic hard drive, essentially leaving you a walking shell. That's what makes them so dangerous. They don't need to physically make contact with you at all. Just a single careless second of eye contact is all it takes for them to hypnotize you into joining their passive-aggressive cult. And they don't need to be within arm's reach either. You make eye contact through binoculars, you're done. As far as I can tell, they don't seem to need to sleep, eat, or make intimate cuddly connections of any kind with other fellow jackals. Now, you're probably asking, but Otis, you said you just killed one. How did he do that without making eye contact? That's an excellent question. Now put your hand down. How did I do it? I cheated. I have these welder's goggles that greatly minimize the strength of their gaze, and as long as I can kill them quickly, I'm in no serious danger. I've been able to dispatch as many as 3 of them several times relatively easily. Once I successfully cut down 4 of them, but I wouldn't want to try that again. They don't just run at you in clusters. They spread themselves thin and come at you from all sides. But you can't just stand there with your eyes closed and wait for them to grab you because, they don't grab you. I suppose they could if they wanted to, but instead they keep their distance, which leaves you with 2 options. A, try to blindly run or fight, or B, risk sneaking a peek. Neither is a good option, by the way. If you don't kill them, then they'll just keep stalking you while gathering themselves in greater numbers. Best option, find a spear or a blade with a long reach and some seriously dark shades. Any old random pair of sunglasses won't cut it. You need something you can stare into the sun with for a solid minute or 2 and not blink. And before you ask, I always have the welder's glasses on, day and night, even when I sleep. I'm sure the tan line around my head is as pale as milk. I finished going through the bloated jackal's pockets and wiped the blood off the blade of my makeshift hockey stick scythe. To answer your next question, yes, the jackals are fairly easy to kill if you can actually see what you're doing. They're about as fragile as any normal man, though their tolerance for pain is considerably higher. You can shoot them, of course, but there's that pesky issue of having to look at them to aim. Blindly lobbing grenades at them works, but I'm willing to bet it kills just as many innocent bystanders as it does bad guys. I decided to go with a more hands-on approach. I'm a Canadian welder, so naturally I decided to wield a long, jagged metal blade on the business end of my hockey stick, like a traditional scythe, and wander around the country alone, delivering death like the Grim Reaper. It's quite a fun irony, really. The jackals condemn you to a seemingly eternal life, whereas I put them in the ground. Don't get me wrong, all the alone time can get irksome. It would be nice to have a cute little Mormon girl dancing down the road behind me, playing the violin or something, but it's hard enough protecting oneself nowadays, without having to protect any tag-alongs. Besides, it would kind of ruin my whole Grim Reaper image. I threw my hood up, pulled my backpack out of the hatchback, and leaned my Reaper stick on my shoulder as I started walking down the deserted road. For breakfast, I'd have to settle for another can of soggy pears. Yum. I glanced up at the blonde on the billboard one more time as my steel-toed boots stomped down heavily upon the concrete, thinking that I may as well check out that sex shop since it'd be on the way. So I'm minding my own business, walking down the middle of what used to be a parking lot, trying to brush my teeth with bottled water and whichever one of my fingers appeared to be cleanest, when I hear the rapidly approaching feet. Sounds like jackals are on the hunt and heading my way. I dropped the magazine I'd found at the sex shop into a nearby trash can. Old habits, you know. And ducked down behind a sun-bleached minivan, still patiently awaiting a load of groceries. There were definitely more than 5 of them this time. My guess was at least 10 to 12, based on the thundering sound of several footfalls, and enough snarling and growling to excite Michael Vick. I watch as about a dozen of them sprint past the parking lot from the direction I had been heading and turn down a side street. I suddenly felt very insignificant. Kind of odd that they weren't tracking my scent. So, who exactly were they hunting anyway? Carefully leaving the cover of my minivan shield, I jogged across the lot and was going to hop the fence and continue on my merry way, heading not here, when I paused. The jackals began crying out in animalistic joy from not very far away. Whatever they were hunting, they had cornered it. Now, I'm by no means a hero, but curiosity is a bitch, and she started metaphorically tugging at me like an awkward teen at a bra strap, and suddenly, I was heading in the direction of the clamor. It had been over 3 weeks since I had encountered anyone without glassy dead eyes, so I decided to see who or what the fuss was all about. I dashed across the street and crouched low, making myself as inconspicuous as possible. After another few yards, I discovered that stealth wasn't going to continue to be an option. The jackals had cornered something in one of those small public bathrooms in the middle of a wide open park, and there was far too much wide open space to hope they wouldn't notice me approaching. The unblinking hellspawn had surrounded the small structure and were calling out like a demonic choir, meaning to attract more of their own. I could have picked up my poker chips and left the table right there before any more undead players arrived, but I figured I was too invested in the situation now to leave the game prematurely. Besides, I was never one to back away from calling a bluff. There were too many to fight, but I wagered I could draw a few away. Picking up a fallen brick, I ran back to the minivan in the grocery store parking lot and heaved the rectangular projectile directly at the windshield. There was a satisfying crunch as the glass buckled, but unfortunately, it wasn't loud enough to attract the attention I needed. If this thing were a Maserati, an alarm likely would have sounded, but good luck finding one of those things in a post-apocalyptic wasteland. Retrieving the brick, I shattered the driver's side window and lay on the horn for about 5 seconds and sprinted back towards the alley. About 3 heartbeats after I found cover, 6 jackals came tearing into the parking lot like it was free candy day. They didn't make for the van, but instead just froze for several seconds and then started making their way towards me. They had my scent, which I suppose was a combination of sweat, soggy pears, and poor life choices. I heaved the brick again through a gas station window and ran back towards the direction of the park while the jackals made for the sound of shattering glass. Much like putting on a condom, every second counted, and that distraction wouldn't fool them for long. When I sprinted towards the park bathroom, 3 were in plain sight, and I imagined the rest were likely around the far side of the building. The jackals froze like marble statues and tried to stare me down as I charged towards them, and with 3 precise swipes of my death stick, I cut them all down. I pounded on the door to the men's room. "Avon lady, open up!" No response from within. I pounded on the door to the women's room. Still nothing. Suddenly regretting my decision to get involved, I pounded harder on the door to the men's room one more time. Glancing over my shoulder, I saw 2 jackals had come from around the building and were boring holes into the back of my head with their gaze. Their faces expressionless, their posture as rigid as stone. I swung my hockey stick twice more like I was harvesting wheat. But from beyond the grass, I saw the other 6 sprinting back towards me. "Now's the time to renew your subscription. Please open the door so I don't have to kick it in." The door to the woman's room timidly opened a crack, and I shoved myself inside like a fat kid as the donut shop opened. I slammed the door behind me and locked the deadbolt. I sighed in relief. "Well, hard part's over." Then I heard the cocking of a gun's hammer right behind my head, and a quiet voice commanded,
"Turn around slowly."
I obediently complied to find 2 kids who looked like they just stumbled out of their high school graduation party staring back at me, a Colt revolver aimed at the dirty smudge between my eyes. The boy had long, sweaty, unkempt curls falling down past his ears, and a peach fuzz goatee, which likely would have gotten him bullied to the point of suicide had society not collapsed. The girl was short and petite, her eyes mostly hidden behind her dark bangs, the massive bulge in her stomach more obvious than a drowned rat in your coffee. But what was more concerning was the samurai sword she held out masterfully, as though she were about to ritually execute me. I don't blame them for their apprehension. After all, a 6'2" hooded bald guy with welder's goggles and blood dripping from his makeshift scythe and spectacles in his Gandalf beard barges into my living room, I'd probably shoot him first and ask questions later. But these kids seemed intelligent enough to realize I may very well have been the lesser of two evils. Lucky for me. I decided to play it cool. Hey there, Frodo. I'm gonna pretend for argument's sake that the gun is loaded. You shoot me with that thing, you'll probably fly backwards through the wall. To his credit, the kid didn't flinch.
Who are you?
I was tempted to give him the whole Grim Reaper spiel, but doubted that would go over well given the circumstances. I'm Otis. How are the three of you doing this fine day? The boy slowly lowered the gun halfway down.
Not great. We got lost on the way to the hospital and had to take shelter here.
I spoke to him like a game show host would to a contestant who's losing his chance at the jackpot. Not a great choice. Too exposed. Only one exit. The boy practically snarled.
No shit, but she could barely walk another step.
At this, the girl slowly sat down on one of the toilets and kept a firm grip on the sword like it was her spear in shark-infested waters. How far along is she? The girl responded to me herself.
Hard to keep track of time anymore, but I would say I was due about a week ago.
I clicked my tongue against my teeth, half sincere and half sarcastic as I muttered. That's outstanding. The boy finally lowered the gun completely, but kept his finger on the trigger.
I'm Lyle, and she's Chloe. The baby is either Astrid or Cody.
Adorable. Now, is that thing actually loaded? I nodded my head towards his hand cannon.
One shot left. We're trying to get to the hospital that's somewhere within a few miles of here. We heard a radio broadcast a few months back that they still had supplies and were operating in the basement.
How have you managed to make it this far? I asked with genuine astonishment. Lyle nodded towards Chloe, who raised her head and parted her bangs with her free hand. Her eyes were cloudy and gray. That's when it suddenly made sense to me. She was blind.
We travel at night, cover ourselves with mud to mask our scent as best we can. We were originally in an underground bunker with 6 others, but we left on foot a month ago, knowing Chloe was eventually going to need a hospital.
I raised an eyebrow. None of the other 6 offered to go with you. Lyle's face went somber.
One of them did.
There was a moment of tense silence. From outside the room, I could hear the shuffling of feet and the occasional bark or snarl of the jackals as they circled the building. Finally, I spoke up. You guys hungry? Chloe's head shot up again.
Oh my god, always.
I took out my last 2 cans of pears and popped them open, handing one to each of them. Lyle gently took the sword from Chloe and set the second can in her other hand. Now, I know what you're thinking. Otis, you said tagalongs were a bad idea. Why are you helping them? You should leave what you can and make for the next sex shop. You know, you're probably not wrong, but fuck you anyway for suggesting it. Like it or not, I found myself invested in their situation, and if I left them behind to fend for themselves, well, realistically, it was like adding at least one more jackal to the world in Lyle's case, and leaving Chloe to die in agony during childbirth on a sticky bathroom floor, if she didn't die of starvation first. And besides, I kind of admire their guts. I hate to pressure you two, but we can't stay here. Every moment that goes by gives more of these things a chance to surround us. Before long, there'll be dozens more out there.
Well, it's not like we can outrun them exactly.
So we're going to have to outthink them. I replied with a wink. Not that they could see that through the goggles, of course. Does that sword work, or is it mostly for show? Chloe raised her head and smirked.
I could carve your Thanksgiving turkey with it. I've been practicing since I was 4.
How do you know what you're swinging at? She replied with a mouthful of pear.
The smell.
I shrugged. Who was I to judge? They had made it this far, after all. I started scanning the room for anything I could use to distract the horde of wailing, brain-dead meat sacks huffing and puffing outside. In a supply locker by the changing table, I found extra rolls of toilet paper, which was surprising to me. You'd think those would have been one of the first things to go extinct after the world ended. I glanced upwards. The ceiling was only a single layer of rigid sheet metal with a wooden frame. This was only a simple park restroom after all, not designed for comforts, but rather just a quick pit stop out of the sun or rain. I found a hatch just above one of the stalls, which opened from the inside. I wasn't going to be able to fit through it, but Lyle easily could. I have an idea. I'm going to need this sword. I helped boost Lyle upwards to the hatch, and then handed the sword and the rolls of toilet paper up after him. I winced hard against the sunlight blazing down through the opening and shielded my face with my hands. I had been forced to let Lyle borrow my welder's goggles for the sake of our escape plan. It had actually hurt pretty bad when I removed them. They had been on so long it felt like I was peeling off a layer of skin. I could barely see the world around me anymore because of how bright it was. Actually, no, that's a lie. I was pretty much as blind as Chloe was. That being said, I decided to sit down next to her and play an awkward round of I Spy with her while we waited for Lyle above. From the bathroom door came a hard pounding. Not the type of pounding like your psycho ex would do if she was angry and wanted back in your life, but the slow, patient, rhythmic pounding of something strong striking the door every few seconds, as if testing its strength, or keeping you distracted until another way in could be discovered.
I thought they didn't get violent.
Chloe spoke in a grim voice that surprisingly wasn't very panicked. They do if you make them impatient enough. They must have gotten tired of staring at the door. They'll break it down eventually, but hopefully not before your baby daddy can get the job done.
Do you have any family?
I have a pet rock waiting for me back home.
I'm being serious.
Chloe's voice sounded hurt. I sighed and stroked my beard. I had a brother. We were heading south to North Dakota. I wanted to get across the border before winter hit us. After a few moments of silence, broken by the pounding at the door, Chloe spoke again.
What happened to him?
He got killed over a pair of shoes. No, actually, it wasn't even a pair of shoes. It was a pair of shoelaces. He was removing them from the body of a dead jackal when some random dickless coward stabbed him from behind with a cracked stick of rebar and left him to die. I could have run after the guy and caught him, I suppose, but my brother was calling my name, so I stayed with him for over an hour until he finally bled out.
That's terrible. I'm so sorry. Did you ever catch the guy?
I nodded, even though I knew the gesture was pointless. The first time I caught him, I broke his nose and cut off one of his ears and told him to run. I caught him again a day later. I broke both his hands with a brick and told him to run again. Chloe gasped. Her voice sounded somewhere between amazed and appalled.
Why would you do that?
When my brother died, I didn't see the point of going on. I decided to make that scumbag my purpose. I'd track him each day, hurt him some more when I eventually caught him, and keep letting him go so I could keep finding him again.
Did you eventually kill him?
Nope. I never found him again after the second time. I suppose technically I'm still hunting for him, but that was over a year ago. He's likely long dead by now, or a very crippled jackal. But, in case he's out there, I keep on traveling. The door shook harder, as if more than one of them had put their weight into it that time. I heard Lyle climb down from the hatch overhead, and felt him return the welder's goggles into my outstretched hand. How did it go?
I got it started, but it'll take a few minutes. How do you see anything wearing those?
Out of necessity. Wrapping the goggles back around my head was nearly as painful as taking them off. I climbed on top of the toilets and peeked outside across the roof. Using a lighter I had found a while back, Lyle had slid the roll of toilet paper down the sword blade and lit it on fire before using the sword to launch the burning roll into the nearby trees. It was late summer, and based on the ugly brown shade the grass had turned, I guess there hadn't been a sprinkle of rain any time recently. The flaming paper grenades had struck the trees several times, but unfortunately, only one had become caught in the low-hanging branches, while the rest began to burn out upon the ground. Hopefully, one direct hit would be good enough to get the job done. Once that tree goes up like a bonfire, most of them will be distracted enough for us to slip away. We'll cut through the stragglers and make our way out of here towards the hospital, and you two can relax until the baby's finally ready to crawl out.
There won't be any time to relax, unfortunately.
Ah, hell no. I winced when I noticed her lower body was soaked. Lyle ran over to her and held her tight. Chloe gasped.
My water just broke. The baby is coming.
Well, I don't mean to ruin this joyous moments, but the jackals will probably break in long before you're done. And even if the tree is still on fire afterwards, we can't exactly move stealthily with a wailing newborn in tow.
You mean we have to go now?
Lyle's voice squeaked like a virgin caught with a vibrator. Unless you'd like to shove your kid back up inside her when she's done. Lyle looked like he was in more discomfort than Chloe was. He looked up at me in desperation and alarm.
How are we going to escape? She can't walk.
Give me the sword. I can make it.
Chloe awkwardly tried to rise to her feet. Lyle looked like he wanted to tell her to sit back down, but the words seemed to die in his throat. I picked my Reaper stick up and headed towards the door. I'll clear a path for you two and try to lure them away.
Otis!
Chloe blindly called out to me in the direction of my footsteps.
Thank you.
Ah, shucks. Anything for a girl with beautiful eyes. I threw the door open and hurled myself outside with the force of a linebacker colliding with his smaller opponent. A fire had started amongst the lower branches of the tree, and while the noise and smoke had started to draw the attention of a handful of jackals, most were still gathering around the restroom door like a Kardashian was about to get naked. I crushed the face of one of them under my steel-toed boots, and then swung my hockey stick scythe in a wide arch, taking out two more of them. I shoved my way past a couple more and took off sprinting across the park. One of them tried to grab hold of me as I ran, but a well-placed elbow to the face managed to shake him off. A few of them started howling and snarling as they took off after me. I didn't glance backwards to see if the kids had taken advantage of my heroic charge to escape. I decided to shake off as many more jackals as I could and circle back and try to regroup with them. I leapt over a park bench and landed with a heavy thump down on one knee. With a hard, sweeping blow, I severed the legs of another wide-eyed monster and cleaved another vertically upwards through the chest. Another jackal built like a train charged me. This one had to have been a bouncer at a UFC club in his former life. I couldn't bring the blade of my scythe around fast enough, so I jabbed the blunt end as hard as I could into his wide-open eye. The temporary blindness those few moments bought me were enough to plant the Reaper blade into his gut. I sprinted in a wide circle around the park. Yes, I'm aware sprinting in steel-toed boots is as difficult as it is miserable, and with a quick leap, stepped off the handrail of a walkway and onto the roof of a gazebo. My hands were slippery with blood, so I wiped them on my jeans, which wasn't a tragedy, as they already looked like a Jackson Pollock painting, and scanned the park quickly in every direction. Lyle was blindfolded and being led awkwardly by Chloe out of the park and back into the street. She was staggering uncomfortably, literally using her feet and toes to read the terrain beneath her while she hacked at whatever grabbed her with her sword. The blind was literally leading the blind as Lyle was forced to hold on to the back of Chloe's belt with both hands as at least a dozen jackals swarmed around them. They weren't going to make it. Chole was going to collapse long before they got to the shelter at the hospital. I sighed and cracked my neck. Let's see if the Grim Reaper can cheat death. I leapt from the gazebo roof and plowed through 3 more jackals, one of them clawing at my arm with long, jagged fingernails as I broke free. I hacked through the glassy-eyed field of wheat as I ran towards the kids, painting the road with their blood in every direction. Up ahead, Chole called out in pain as another contraction hit her and she fell to her knees. Lyle wrenched the blindfold off and grabbed the sword from her, blindly swinging the Japanese blade around him as if he were trying to swat a fly. The jackals surrounded them in a tight circle, but kept out of reach of the sword. I'm not sure if he did it deliberately. Maybe it was just reflexive, or maybe he wanted to look at Chole one last time. But Lyle opened his eyes and looked right into the face of a wizened, white-haired jackal. His face went expressionless, and his jaw went slack, and he dropped the sword without making a sound. Chole screamed for him to answer her, but it was already too late. Lyle was gone. Erased, rebooted, and his eyes would never close again. I broke through the circle of jackals and knocked Lyle and several others to the ground. Dropping my Reaper stick, I picked up Chole and ran as hard as I could. She sobbed uncontrollably in my arms, knowing without me having to say anything what was happening and why Lyle wasn't responding. The jackals ran after us like we were sponsoring a marathon, keeping close yet just out of reach, so I couldn't just spin around quickly and headbutt one of them into the pavement. Chole was a small girl, but she got heavy really quick, and after a few moments, my sprints became a jog and then a brisk walk. I turned a corner and set her down upon her feet. You have to go the rest of the way to the hospital on your own. I can see the hospital from here. It's about 100 yards away. A straight shot. Just keep walking, and once you hit the door, keep pounding until someone lets you in. I'll hold them off for as long as I can.
You can't leave me, Otis. I won't make it without you.
Without me is the only way you'll make it. Thanks for giving me a reason to ride out the apocalypse, kid. I winked, even though she wouldn't see it. I patted her shoulder, and she began to hobble in the direction of the emergency room doors. I spun around to face the jackal horde. There were at least 30 of them, staring at me, with more heading my way. Kicking off my boots, I quickly placed them over my fists like boxing gloves. Who's first? I chuckled, and launched myself into the crowd. I'd like to say I fought my way through them, that they didn't overpower me and tear the welder's goggles off. But this is an apocalypse story after all, and nothing ever ends well. One thing I can tell you is one of the last things I saw were 2 people in white coats helping Chole through the hospital doors. Frankly, that's a happy enough ending for me. I'd like to think that's what made the last several years of misery worth it, and that my brother would be proud. Now fuck off and go be a hero to someone. This Grim Reaper's wandering days are over. He looked into the mirror, saw his reflection, and smiled.